Something that hasn't been discussed about the Idaho investigation into Bryan Kohberger and the horrible murder of those 4 young students is what direction the police decide to investigate in terms of, is this a one-off, a one-time event, or are they trying to find out if this is someone who is not so much a serial killer, but a repeat criminal, okay? So what this looks like is they start collecting their evidence, right? Let's say they do find proof of one of the victims, the ID or articles of clothing, or whatever they find that they believe connects Kohberger. What does that tell them about whether this was all in contemplation of this act or there are others? How do they allocate resources on the basis of that decision? How do they try to make a case? And what is that case? And what are the charges? You see what I'm saying? It gets very complicated, and the implications are very profound. So let's bring in defense attorney Mark Geragos and forensic psychiatrist Dr. Carole Lieberman, and there's Coffindaffer. I wasn't sure if you were going to make it. It's good to have everybody. If they only knew the chaos that goes on in the commercials. But now we have everybody. All right. So let's start with the idea of the decision they have to make and then how that terms in terms of practicality. Dr. Lieberman, I start with you. You're saying, glad you finally caught up to me, CUOMO. These are the kinds of things I was suggesting to you way back when were going to happen in this case. How so?
That is true, because even before they arrested Kohberger, I was saying that the killer was an incel because of the bloody crime scene, how bloody it was, which meant how violent it was and intimate it was, and then who the victims were, because they were typical Stacys, what incels call Stacys, the kind of women who they can't get, you know, the kind of women who have been rejecting them. And with Kohberger, we know that this started in middle school. And what's interesting is the first girl who rejected him that we know about, who came forward, looks very much like Kaylee. So this is something that, you know, has been going on in his mind, and this is of the final expression of all of his anger and rage at all these women who have been rejecting him all his life.
And if he is an involuntarily celibate male, what you're calling an incel, what does what we know so far suggest in terms of this was a one-off of a one-time object of his obsession versus he's done this other times?
Yes, that's an interesting question because, you know, it's possible that there were other women before before these 3, and of course, Chad is Ethan is a Chad, the man who can get an incel, a Stacy as a girlfriend. So there might have been others before this. I don't necessarily think that that's the case, but there could be things like dogs, for example, or animals, other kinds of animals that he was trying out some of his, you know, some of this stabbing on to see how it felt and how hard it was and so on. But I don't know that there would have been a perfect incel, Stacy, Chad kind of situation.
Fascinating. Coffindaffer, in terms of how you wind up having to apportion resources as an investigation starts to go from one to maybe not one and done, what does that look like investigatively in terms of what we've learned from the circumstances so far?
Well, it means more resources, specifically if other individuals have been identified, they're going to put a lot of resources, not only federal resources, particularly the FBI, but those state and local resources to look into those possible cases that exist.
Geragos, do me a favor. Put on your just wisdom hat for a second, not defense counsel hat. As you know, all along, I've been like, this guy stunk at this. For a guy who was getting his doctorate in criminology, he drove his own car. He was in places where he knew there may be surveillance. We know what he did inside the house that was anything but methodical. He came with a hunting knife or whatever, a military-style knife. He walked out and left a witness. You know, all kinds of things. Talked about it, was online about it. I've never been impressed by his execution, let's say. But in your experience, what kinds, can you draw any kind of observation of what kinds of assailants are repeat versus one time?
You know, that's an interesting question, to borrow Carole's expressions, with apologies. The interesting thing that I've found, and I've handled more than my fair share of homicide cases, is if there is a repeat, and I'm thinking it's few and far between in terms of serial killers, but repeat murders or being accused of murder, there is a type, and there kind of a 0 to 60 kind of emotion, and the things that trigger are always overstated, if you will. I've represented people who have committed or been accused of committing the crime with a long period of time in between, and you notice that there is, or at least I notice, at least anecdotally, that it has to do with their ability to modify or modulate their urges, if you will.
Hey, thank you for watching. Please go to newsnationnow.com, newsnationnow.com, and you can find NewsNation on your television provider. And don't forget to click the red subscribe button down below. Then you will get more of NewsNation's fact-driven coverage.